Hi everyone, Tony Tonkin here from Child Protection Party. Glad you could join me again on a Sunday night to have a chat about all things in relation to ensuring that the outcomes for children improve. So there's a couple of things I want to talk about tonight, but primarily I just want to introduce everybody to an idea which I came up with last week, and that is about an awards CPP Awards. So awards that we're planning to initiate for parents, for caregivers, for those people who are involved in the child protection system who never ever get award or an award of any sort or any sort of recognition for that matter. And so this is a new initiative. I've put together a short video on this subject which we'll be placing on our Facebook and YouTube page in the next day or so. So I asked you to look out for that and to also continue to be aware of any other details that will be released in the meantime about what the CPP Awards are all about. Now, before I start talking about other things, I just need to let people know that I'm suffering from double vision at the moment. So if I look away or I squint or I close one eye, it isn't because I'm winking at you. It's because I'm having trouble visualising and seeing the screens that are in front of me. So I do apologise for that. It's a problem which I'm working through at the moment, and hopefully we'll have it resolved in the next couple of weeks. So if you've got a question or anything that you'd like to say to me, please feel free to do so. I'll do what I can to read the screen, even though at the moment when I look to my left I see two of them, and I will respond. Tracy, thanks very much for joining us, and it's good to have you on board as well. So one of the other things, apart from the awards, is, and I'd like people to participate in the awards over the next few weeks. We haven't set a date as to when that it all comes to an end, but and it'll depend on how many nominations we get, what those nominations are, and so forth. And so we'll be discussing a little bit more about this awards process. It actually came about because primarily I noticed that last week the Department of Child Protection here in South Australia had an awards night for a whole host of organisations primarily that are involved in the child protection space, and nothing, really nothing, to commemorate the work that parents do in order to get their children returned to them. So that's the reason why I thought we need to have an awards night that celebrates the work that people do. Doesn't mean they have to be successful at that, but at least we can recognise the efforts that people put into having kids returned to them, and also anybody that may have any ideas that are helpful in terms of changing the child protection system. So the other thing I wanted to talk about tonight was the conference on domestic violence, which name just escaped me at the moment, but that was held during the week. And the fact that we were regurgitating over and over again all the issues concerning domestic violence, and there was some fabulous speakers on board, and there was a lot of stuff around Indigenous concerns in relation to this. But what came out of it to me was identified in Insiders today on the ABC, and that was that we've been talking about issues around domestic violence and so on for decades now, and though we have the same conversations over and over again around domestic violence, but nothing changes. And what occurred to me is that, well, actually it's not new to me, but I did come to realise that we have the same conversations around child protection, around producing better outcomes for kids generally, around suicide rates, around education, around childhood sexual assault. We've been having the same conversations forever, and nothing ever seems to really change. And my wife and I were discussing why this happens, and she was watching some period piece that dated back to, she was reading something that dated back to the 1700s, to the 18th century, and we were realising that if we look at things in terms of centuries, we certainly can notice some specific changes around values and principles and a whole host of stuff over a lengthy period of time. But when we look at things more recently, it's really difficult to discover what actually has changed. Now, my wife actually wrote a book on the evolution of foster care in Australia. And she noted, and her colleague noted, that nothing had changed, and they went back 120 odd years, but nothing had changed over that period of time. We're still treating children the same way. We're still behaving in exactly the same way as we do around fostering, and particularly the way we view kids. In fact, one of the things that is quite startling is that centuries ago everybody seemed to be prejudicial. There was very embedded beliefs that they had about certain people. So the poor were excluded, the poor were neglected, and those that were poor certainly didn't have a voice. And this is hundreds of years ago. We're discovering that basically, if we're really sensible and we look at it, the poor today have as little voice as they did back 200 years ago. And these are concepts and principles that need to be challenged, and they need to change. And we as a community need to find ways to combat some of those views. So I was having a conversation this afternoon with this wonderful woman from WA, and she was telling us how she was fortunate enough in order to have a grandchild returned to her, and she worked very hard at that, and she was able to identify the problems and the issues that sat within the system. And then she made a statement, though, about being able to go to court and being able to afford to do that in order to fight for, and rightfully so, this child to be returned to her care. And what occurred to us at the time was that if you have the resources, so if you have the money to be able to afford a lawyer to start with, it doesn't matter whether it's the best lawyer or not, but just to be able to afford to fight a case legally, then you will have a better than normal chance of getting a child back, because we know that in this country, legal aid is virtually non-existent if you wish to combat or challenge the child protection system. It's just to have the money to be able to fight the system means that you've got very little chance of winning, because you just won't be able to afford the legal services that are required. Even though, when I reflect on this, I do know of a number of people who, one I'm particularly thinking about, who certainly had those resources to fight to get her kids back, and she had a barrister, and it wasn't successful. Yet she was very deserving of having those kids returned to her. But the issue is that people who can access those resources have got a better chance of having children returned to them than those who aren't. Now, they have often, people that have got access to money are normally viewed differently than those people that don't. So if you're seen as impoverished, if you've got mental well-being issues and all the other stuff that comes with it, domestic violence, whatever, if you've got all those things happening for you, then the system, that is the people that work within the system, primarily social workers and others, will judge you for your circumstances. They will not see you for the type of person that you are. I had a guy come and see me last week whom I had heard something about over a period of about 12 months. I've heard little bits and pieces about this person, and I hadn't yet been able to work out whether or not he was the type of person that was being portrayed by the department. And when I met him, I discovered that he is a completely different person who has completely been misunderstood by the assessments and by the innuendo and by all the notifications that have been made and about conversations the department have had with other people. And I asked him, look, have people had conversations with you about the sorts of things that we've been talking about today? And he said, no one's ever asked him about him or endeavoured to have this conversation with him that revealed who he really was. And I think that there's a big gap in the system whereby people can't afford to get the services that they require and need. And we need to fix that as the Child Protection Party. We need to ensure that we work so that legislation, eventually when we get someone in Parliament, that we have legislation that enables access to appropriate funding for people to be able to take a case to court. And so that we can, so that people have the right to be able to fight this monolithic system we call the child protection system and at least have a reasonable chance of winning. We need to be able to change people's perception of other people so that you can get a whole lot of versions of someone tossed at you, but those versions aren't necessarily the true versions. They're the way other people perceive you. And there's things that we've done in our past that kind of track with us over time, and people think that that's the way that we are right now. Well, that's not the way it is. That's not true of who people are. And so I was also meeting up with a woman who has an Indigenous child, and that child was removed from her last week, soon after birth, stayed in hospital for a while. Child did, and then was eventually removed. And again, the system was failing to see who this woman was now. They were busily painting a picture of who she might have been some years earlier, but certainly not who she was now as a mother. And I find myself reaching a point of complete despair about how it is that I can work in a way that endeavours to uncover the true nature of who a person is, I guess, and yet there's another system out there that refuses to acknowledge the positive qualities that somebody's got, to give them an opportunity to demonstrate those qualities in a way which is going to benefit their children, there's a system out there that just puts a blanket over any possibility that somebody has of revealing something about themselves that is substantive, that is really who they are at this particular point. It's almost like we don't want to see that person, because if that person reveals to us, then we have to make a different decision about removing the child. And we can't afford to do that, because at the end of the day, we might be wrong. And so we can't, so it's safer for us. So it's safer for the department to remove a child given someone's history than it is to acknowledge who they are right now and they're capable of being the parent that they need to be. And I'm sure there's lots of people out there right now who'll be watching this video now and later on who will agree that it's atrocious the way that they have been judged, and as a result of that judgment, they have had their kids removed from them. Because we reckon that between 50 and 60% of children that have been removed could be returned to their parent if the department and others decided to view those parents a wee bit differently than the way they do. Karen, it's good to see you on there as well. Always deal with, so thanks Ross for joining us as well. I really appreciate that. Deal with that. So I'm sorry about closing my eye, but I've got this double vision thing happening and I can't read it otherwise. Always deal with the behaviour rather than the personality, e.g. you view the current behaviour rather than the personality, what other people say or perceive. And it's other person's versions. So the notifications, now I've talked about this 1,000 times, but it is the notifications are often someone's perception of the way someone has behaved. So a good example is the young child that I know of recently who went to daycare with a cut above his eye. And the cut occurred sometime during the night, so it wasn't delivered by any of the parents, but it occurred somewhere during the night. They don't know how this cut happened on his eye, but the parents decided to send him off to daycare centre, patched him up, and he went to daycare. And of course, daycare reported it. So the assumption was automatically made that one of the parents had abused this child because it had a cut above its eye. Now, I can assure you that if this child, so one of the parents had children already removed, and this is a new partner and stuff, but the judgment would have been, and this guy is fabulous. He's one of those guys where whatever no one within the department understands who he is. No one. They just see him as a terrible father, and he isn't. And I know he isn't. And fabulous man. Anyway, so this notification was made based on his past and history with DCP, his socio-economic background, and the fact that he had a new relationship and there was a child present. And so no one, like at the daycare centre, spoke to the parent about what happened and tried to find out the information. They just made a notification. Lo and behold, this woman, first time ever for her, she has a child removed from her home, and it's a new partner's fault. And it just blows my mind that we allow this sort of crap to continue when in actual reality this kid is not at risk. No, he's not at risk at all. But there you go, another case where a child gets removed unnecessarily. And how many, like in my experience, I come across a lot of these families where, number one, don't have to remove the child because there aren't any really issues there. Number two, if you work with the families, you wouldn't have to remove the children in the first place because the parents would be more than happy to deal with the issues that are of concern. But they do, because they're risk averse. And at any opportunity they have, they will find a space in order to remove a child. And somewhere along the line, so I want to come back to what I was saying before. I hope I'm not boring you with all of this, but I want to come back to what I was saying before about the fact that none of what we experience today has changed. And someone asked me today, how did we come to set up CPP? And I explained the genesis of the idea and why I did it, and I came to another realization, I guess, that this stuff, one could argue it's really difficult. Like if a system hasn't changed for over 100 years, why do we have the expectation that it will? And are we not endeavouring to push shit uphill, basically? And so why do we do it? And the answer always is for me, well, why not? If we give up on stuff just because it seems hard or has never been achieved before, then clearly nothing is ever going to change, is it? I mean, if we decided that, would we have the light bulb? If Edison had decided to give up, 999 efforts and say, bugger it, I can't do the light bulb. I guess someone else would have. But, what would we do if we all gave up? And we at CPP struggle with this because we've been endeavouring to increase not only our membership, which is important to us, and I encourage you to get onto our website and to join up with us to help in this fight. If you haven't done so, do so right this minute. Go to childprotection.party and and join up or donate to us, because we need money to do whatever it is we need to do. And then on the other hand, we've got all these we've got people that say they want to join us. So joining us is about just becoming a member. But if you want to do more than that, there's plenty of opportunities available to us. No matter where you are in Australia, there's things that you can do. There's jobs that we need to have done. There's members of parliament we need to, or candidates we need to have so that we can have members in parliament. There's a lot of structural things that we do. There's policies that need to be developed. There's branches in each state that needs to be established. There's membership drives we need to have in order to get numbers to a point whereby we can go back and get our registration nationally and get registration in each state. There's so much to do. Now, the question I'm going to ask you is, do you want us to stop fighting for you? Is that what you want? Do you want to complain to us all the time about what's been happening to you, or do you want to support us to help you to get to where you want to go? Because you need to be able to understand that it's important that if you want us to work for you, then maybe it's really good idea if you start to work with us to get to where you need to go. Now, we can't guarantee, obviously, that we're ever going to help you get your kid back specifically. But if we work together, we may be able to change the system. The way this system works is never going to be fixed by money, but it's always going to be fixed by changing the way we approach it. the way we think about it, the way we might choose to do things differently. This is what is going to change. And we need to work together to encourage everybody to think differently about the problem so that we can bring about outcomes that are going to assist kids in the future. You know, we don't want our kids to grow up in a society which is dysfunctional, that is not running as it should be. We want our kids to grow up in a society that is better prepared, that can make the changes, significant changes that it needs in order to improve the outcomes for these kids so that as adults they become functioning adults. It's a bit like, I reckon, if COVID-19 is a really good example as to, and it's the manufacture and the selling of ideas. All right, so you've got a whole range. I'm not going to buy into, what are the good or the bad ideas, because I get myself into trouble when I do that. But we had to have a pandemic in order for us to realise that there was an enemy at our door that we had to try and find a solution for. And we had to find a solution for it quickly. Now, the type of vaccines that we have been in development for years, long before the pandemic arrived. But people have been looking at these vaccines. So the manufacturing of them, putting it together, the supply of the ingredients, if you like, to the vaccines was the primary issue. But in the end, they were able to develop a vaccine. Whether you like vaccines or not, who gives a shit? The point is that they were able to develop a vaccine and a number of vaccines in relatively quick time because it was an emergency. We need to be seeing child protection system and developing better outcomes for kids in the same way that we see this pandemic, as an emergency. If there's a bushfire, everybody in the community gathers together. You don't sit down and think, are you Labor or Liberal, or are you right wing or left wing, or that. No one gives a shit. What they do is everybody just gathers together to solve the problem. And what we're asking people to do is, we have this massive problem about how we treat kids and how we treat families, how we treat biological parents, and how we treat kinship families, and how we treat foster families. A whole lot of stuff is captured in this stuff. And it is a pandemic. And it's been going on in our faces for over a century now. And it's about time we addressed it and saw it for what it is. It damages people's lives. It turns kids that could grow up to be productive, valued kids. It produces kids, though, that have low self-esteem, that are traumatised from all of the experiences that they've had, and wind up doing terrible things when it comes to entering into society as adults, if not before. And we don't see it as a problem. We're starting to see domestic violence as the problem that it is. But even though those people that think about domestic violence and work in that area, they cannot. Even the summit during the week couldn't come up with any original ideas in order to solve that problem. One woman a week dying at the hands of a violent partner is definitely unacceptable. But we can't see a way of resolving the issue, because the issue is far greater than just that. It's about changing people's behaviour so that they see each other differently and in a respectful way. That is the solution. And with child protection, it's the same thing. We need to change people's behaviour so that they then behave in a way which produces better outcomes for kids and their families. That's what we need to be working towards. But in order to do that, we need to identify the behaviours. The DV is that good example. If we can identify the behaviour and we can call it out, whether it be coercive control, whether it be physical violence, whether it be financial violence, whether it be sexual assault, calling out for what it is, not necessarily adding penalties to it, but identifying the bad behaviour. Because the bad behaviour that we see within the child protection system, perpetrated by the people that are supposed to uphold that system, the people that are supposed to support it, the workers, the NGOs, the governments, all those people, we need to be identifying what their bad behaviour is. Not always we need to identify, I'll reframe that, we need to identify the bad behaviour that may cause a child to be removed. Because a lot of the time, well, all the time, that's unacceptable. But we need to be able to identify the bad behaviour that fails to address the problem that causes kids to be removed in the first place. That's the issue. And that's the sort of thing that we should be being addressed. I'm just going to blink again and have a quick look over here. So Rod says, Tony, if you had a magic wand, what would be the change that you would make? That's a good question, Ross, and the answer is quite simple. I would be asking all social workers to grab hold of their code of ethics and read it through thoroughly and start to realise that it is that the person who they see in front of them has a story to tell, that we need to understand what that story is and help them to overcome whatever the issue is that's brought them to this place in the first place. And to let people know that the story that they tell is not the sum total of who they are. Within that story sits a lot of strengths, some fabulous things they've been able to do and overcome. A lot of these people that we see in front of us, they themselves have had shitty parents. And we need to understand how those shitty parents have impacted them. The type of self-image, if you like, that they've been able to develop through their childhood of who they are. Because everybody has the ability to be able to redirect where they wish to go in life once they understand where they've come from. There's a saying in emotional programming is when we understand what we've been doing and why we've been doing it, we'll be able to change our behaviour forever. I learnt that 20 years ago and have believed it ever since. Once we understand. And sometimes we just need people to stand alongside us who believe in us. That's the other thing, Ross. If we could sit by somebody and say, we believe in you, we believe that you can become the person that you want to be. You just need some help along the way. There are many examples of kids that have been in care who have had crappy parents, run away from foster care multiple times, had multiple placements. But somewhere along the line, they've met one person who believed in them. There's a wonderful story of a guy that I saw on YouTube who had run away from home many, many times. His behaviour was horrific and he felt displaced. He felt unloved wherever he went. And he finally went with this foster parent, and he ran away from home and he committed a crime. I think he stole a car or something. And he expected the foster parent to say to him what all the others have: I give up on you, you're hopeless, you're no good, whatever. And the foster parent didn't. The foster parent said to him, I don't care what you do. I am not going to stop believing in you, and I'll be with you the whole way. From that moment on, that young person's behaviour changed because he came to realise that there was this one person who believed in him. He didn't necessarily believe in him, but there was one person who did. And that changed his life. And that young person went on to study social work and became a social worker. And you hear stories similar to that throughout their lives. And for all of us, there can often be one person in your life that makes a difference. There's one person that wasn't a family member in my life who made a world of difference to the way I view myself and my world. And I think of him quite often, and that was a certain teacher at school. So that's what we need to change. We need to believe in the people that we work with. That, Ross, will change the way, the type of outcomes that we wind up having. Right, we're not the same opportunity for facilities for effective outcomes with the best interest The lower income is asked to start with a mental health plan, to then be assessed as to who to see, etc. Whereas money gets you straight into the most adequate, efficient support. I think I don't know whether I necessarily agree with that entirely, Diana. I think that there are plenty of supports available for people from all sorts of backgrounds. You can get, social workers, accredited mental health social workers use Medicare. I personally bulk bill, so my clients don't ever have to pay anything. There are avenues in order to get services, and you don't necessarily have to be a wealthy person. It doesn't mean I don't think necessarily going into the best psychiatric clinic in town that's a private one necessarily is the best thing either. I think the best thing to do is just find a way to find a counsellor of some description that will help you through whatever those mental wellbeing issues are. I think it's about a lot of people, I think, believe that if they go to a service, they're going to be judged. And I know that a lot of people will go to get counselling and they don't find it effective at all because they just haven't found an effective counsellor. It's like going to the doctor that you find isn't going to give you the service or has a bedside manner you don't appreciate. And you just go out and you find yourself another doctor. But there are some fabulous counsellors out there who will be able to provide the service that you need for you, but you need to look for them. If you've got the biggest issue for me, I guess, is around domestic violence and the lack of understanding as to why women might stay within a violent relationship. And when they get out, why don't we really celebrate that and help them financially in terms of a house and a home and a whole lot of other things that we could do for them? Why is it that we're not looking after kids in foster care differently? Why don't we provide the best possible education for kids that are in foster care? Why is it that we have kids in residential care when they shouldn't be in residential care at all? And they've just instigated therapeutic foster care, which we've been talking about for years here at CPP. So there's lots of things that could be changed, but we don't often change them. Okay, folks, thanks very much for being with us. Just remember that I'm putting out a video in the next day or so on CPP Awards. We'd really like you to participate in that, if you would. And also, can you remember that on Wednesday nights at around 7 o'clock, I think, or 7:30, I can't remember, we hold a focus group where we talk about a whole range of issues. And you're most welcome to come to that. Just need to access it through our Facebook page and sign in when we give you the link to join us for that. Apart from that, I just hope that all of you are looking after each other and making sure that you are safe. Take care of yourself, everybody, and be kind.